Right now, then, we're going to talk about something else that I think a lot of parents certainly care about, and that is who is exactly looking after your children at school, and exactly what are your children being taught at school, because not only can you have a problem with some of the stuff on the curriculum, but you might also have a problem about some of the sex education classes that have been going on. Miriam Cates is a Conservative MP for Penistone and Stocksbridge, and she's been campaigning for quite some time. She's a former biology teacher herself. She's been campaigning for quite some time about giving parents the right to know precisely what is going on inside the school that your kids are going to. Now, before we speak to her, let's just have a watch of this. She appeared before a parliamentary committee a little bit earlier on.
We'll try not to take it all up. Let me start with a health warning. My speech is not suitable for children, which is sadly ironic given that all of the extreme and inappropriate material I'm about to share has already been shared with children in our schools. As a former biology teacher, I've delivered my fair share of sex education, and teaching the facts of life often comes with more than a little embarrassment for teachers and pupils alike. And I remember teaching about reproduction when I was about 30 weeks pregnant with my first baby. One child asked me if my husband knew I was pregnant. Another, having watched a video on labour and birth, commented, "Miss, that's really going to hurt, you know." Just as children don't know about photosynthesis or the digestive system without being taught, neither do they know the facts of reproduction. So it's important that children are taught clearly and truthfully about sex, and of course there's a lot more to sexual relationships than just anatomy.
Miriam Cates, MP, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, Miriam. It's a very important subject, this, and I'm very glad as a parent that you're bringing it up, because I think there's a huge issue around what schools teach our children, not just in sex education, but in lots of other ways as well. And it's very difficult, and I think a lot of parents are finding this, to find out what's actually going on inside the classroom on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think, I'm a parent myself. I've got 3 school-age children. And I think, generally, parents trust schools to teach and educate our children, and rightly so. But our understanding is that schools are in loco parentis. They're in place of us as parents for that 6-7 hours a day. And I think when they're teaching subjects like maths or science where there's no real contended issues, most parents are perfectly happy to let the school get on with it. It's their area of expertise. Parents are not widely demanding to see lesson plans of what's being taught in maths and English. But I think when we get onto issues about relationships and sex, some of these areas are contested. Families share very different views and values about these things, and it's right that parents should have access to the types of materials and the curriculum that are being taught to their children on these issues. And I'm really, really pleased that the Secretary of State for Education has come out today and said that he absolutely thinks parents should have the right to see those resources. That is a big step forward, because lots of the parents I've spoken to in the course of campaigning on this issue have told me that schools have refused them access to these resources on the grounds of copyright issues and commercial sensitivity. And that's wrong, because, as I said, schools are in the place of the parents. They only have responsibility because parents give them that permission. So it's right that parents should have full access to what's being taught.
Yes, indeed, because some of the things that you've discovered and some of the sort of documentation and leafleting that's going on is really quite odd, isn't it? I mean, for example, you've found that there are materials in the Sex Education Forum that divide children into menstruators and non-menstruators. You've got a thing from an organisation called BISH, which states that many people are in the middle of the spectrum in terms of their genitals. And all of this presumably feeds into a recent YouGov poll, which found that 79% of secondary school teachers had pupils who were trans or non-binary. It's an extraordinary figure.
It is extraordinary, and it's a change that has happened phenomenally fast. And obviously we've had this new curriculum for 2 years now, this RSE curriculum, and it's not at all the fault of schools or teachers that this has made its way into children's lives so quickly. The internet and cultures around the world are certainly the source of it, but it does seem to be reinforced in schools in quite sometimes a dangerous way. And I think teachers and schools and heads need to step back and think about what are they teaching. Of course it's right to be tolerant, and to teach children to be kind and accepting. But it's not okay to teach things that are factually incorrect or to teach beliefs and ideology as fact. That is misleading to children. It's called indoctrination, and it's not allowed, and we need to be very strong about that. And I think, whilst of course children should be prepared for adult life, and we shouldn't be afraid of talking in an age-appropriate way about things that are going on in the world, there's a big difference between being age-appropriate and then introducing children to ideas that they're just not developmentally able to understand. And I'll give you an example. I mean, I have been emailed by so many people over the last few days, and there have been comments on my articles and things like that with some really, really alarming stories of what's going on in school. One that is repeatable on air, but very tragic, is a parent who told me that their 9-year-old came home from school shaking and white because they've been taught about rape. Now, rape's a really difficult issue. It's an important issue. It's right to teach children about consent. But should we be telling a 9-year-old the details of rape? Personally, I don't think that's appropriate. So I think we've lost our way, really, in terms of what's age appropriate. And that's why we need a light shining on the issue, so parents can see what's being taught, and so that educators can take a step back and really think about child development and what it is right and wrong to teach children at different ages.
Yes, I mean, you've also spoken about some sort of controversial theories that are out there that are being espoused by teachers. And you have to remember as well that children, to a large extent, look up to their teachers. Even if they're not particularly well behaved in school, they still see their teachers as more knowledgeable, more respectable than they are, perhaps. But how about this? A group called Amaze suggesting that boys who wear nail varnish or girls who like weightlifting might actually not be boys or girls. They might be the opposite sex to what they think they are, which is, again, a ludicrous thing to espouse, isn't it?
It is, and it's incredibly regressive, because I grew up in the 80s and 90s when we as girls were being told that we didn't need to conform to stereotypes of what girls should be, what we should look like, what we should do. We can do what we like. We're as good as boys. And some of these stereotypes are actually regressive. They're going back to those ideas of gender conforming and gender non-conforming. So I think that's dangerous. But, we have to ask the question, how has it become the case that so many adults have suddenly decided that you can have 64 genders, that you can change sex? These are quite strange things to believe from a scientific point of view, and yet they seem to have captured whole sections of our society. And again, that's why we need this review. That's why we need transparency, to step back and think, what is the evidence for this? Is it safe to teach children these ideas? How should we talk about them if we do talk about them? And I think we've kind of been caught up in talking about these issues in a certain way that hasn't been helpful to children. And again, I really applaud the Education Secretary and other members of the Cabinet for stepping into this and talking about how we can be factual, how we can be legal in talking about these issues.
And in terms of the sort of school curriculum as such, I mean, is there anything in it that would stop this from being allowed to be done? I mean, is there a sort of guide on sex education that is supposed to be followed? Are they not following it, or do you need a guide?
Well, there is guidance, and it's certainly the case that many of these things that are being taught and are available don't meet the guidance. So we've got an issue of enforcement. Whose job is it to make sure that schools are sticking to those guidance? So, for example, schools must check outside agencies very carefully before they allow them into schools to visit and speak to children, or indeed use their resources. And actually, some of these groups, if you just do a cursory check of their website, you look at the links, you look at some of the materials that are out there, some links to political campaigning, they wouldn't meet that test. So the first question is, whose responsibility is it for enforcing the guidance? But secondly, the guidance is vague, and in some ways it's contradictory. So, for example, it says things should be age appropriate. Now, who's the judge of that? I think most people, there's an understood pedagogy behind what's age-appropriate in maths, but do we really understand what's age-appropriate in terms of sex and relationships? Should we be getting child development academics involved in this, people who actually know about brain development and puberty and things like that, to determine what age-appropriate is, to take those decisions out of the school's hands? But also, the guidance is confusing. So it both says that you shouldn't put forward ideas that children can change sex or change gender, but at the same time it says that you should teach the law about gender identity, the law and the facts about gender identity. Now, there isn't such a thing as gender identity in law, and I'm not sure what the facts are, because it's a belief system. It is a strongly held belief, but it is a belief system and not based on scientific facts. So that in itself is confusing. So I think the whole thing needs rewriting. I think it needs doing in conjunction with child development experts, and then we need to find a way to enforce the guidance.
And if you're a parent listening to this and they're perhaps not happy with what's going on in their school, what can they do if, for example, they approach the school and the school isn't particularly cooperative?
Well, first of all, as a parent and a former teacher, I have to say that the vast majority of schools and teachers desperately want to do a good job. They care about children. They want to teach them and educate them in the best possible way. So I think starting from the premise that the school wants to do a good job is a good start. And parents can come alongside schools, challenge them, yes, but help them. You know, many schools and teachers, I think, are like a rabbit in a headlight. You know, there's this wealth of information and material that's sprung up over the last 2 years. It's a very difficult topic to teach. I've done it myself, and they genuinely don't know where to turn. And I think parents being supportive is a good start. But if schools won't release materials or they won't respond to complaints, then obviously parents do need to take it further. And I would recommend at the moment that parents contact groups like Safe Schools Alliance, who've got some brilliant materials, who are very strong on what the law and parents' rights are in here and can support parents in that space. But ultimately, I think that the Education Secretary's intervention today, that parents do have a right to see those materials, is a really, really good step forward for parents.
OK, brilliant stuff. Miriam, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Miriam Cates, MP, Conservative MP for Peddiston and Stocksbridge, former biology teacher, talking an awful lot of sense there